Metal Jesus, I'm back with part 2 of my Forgotten Racing Games series. And I feel like it's my job to kind of highlight some of the racing games that maybe time and gamers have forgotten about. Now, some of these actually probably sold fairly well, but maybe the developer went out of business, or I don't know, maybe they didn't get a sequel. And that's a shame because a lot of these are really great racing games. So let's take a look. Here's a racing game that is a total surprise, and that is called Downhill Domination. Now, this looks like a total kind of cheesy budget title, and it's for the PlayStation 2, but man, it is surprisingly good. And the reason for that is, I suspect, is because it's by the same developers who made some of the Twisted Metal games, like the Twisted Metal Black. And this game is really fun. It's got an incredible sense of speed. You feel like you're almost completely out of control when you play this game. And even though you're playing mountain bikes, so it's not exactly the most exciting kind of subject matter, or maybe the most exciting vehicle that you could take on a track, but it's actually a lot of fun. I would say probably the downside to this game is that the sense of speed can almost be too much at times. It can be a little frustrating. And there's a trick system in this game that's similar to maybe what you'd find in Tony Hawk or SSX, but it's not as good. It's actually fairly complex.
Can't look better than this, baby. Come on, get down.
So the nice thing is that this game typically isn't very expensive. So if you see it for a couple bucks, and you like racing games that are a little bit different and have their own sense of style, yeah, you should definitely check out Downhill Domination on the PlayStation 2. Now, since I'm such a huge fan of music and racing games, well, you'd have to kick me in the nuts if I didn't actually include this title in there, and that is the really fun Rock and Roll Racing. This is the Super Nintendo version here, but there's also a Genesis version that a lot of people love. And this is a really cool game that mixes rock and metal and classic racing, and there's a little bit of combat in this game as well. Now, a really interesting fact about this game, not a lot of people know, is that it was developed by Silicon and Synapsys. That's actually what eventually became Blizzard. So it's really interesting how Blizzard got their start making a rock and roll racing game. Who knew? So in addition to Mr. George Thorogood that you heard in the beginning, it's also got some Steppenwolf in here. It's got Radar Love from Golden Earring, classic song. Highway Star from Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath Paranoid, and some other stuff. So it's a cool game if you're into, rock and racing. Now, speaking of rock, this game's called Motorhead, and with a name like Motorhead, well, it's gotta be good, right? So this is Motorhead, and this is the PC version here. This game is also released on the PlayStation 1. And for whatever reason, people just don't give it a lot of love. It seems like people have kind of forgotten this racing game. This game was kind of considered to be sort of dark and moody and maybe a little bit futuristic, and I guess it kind of looked a little bit different than other games at the time. Maybe that had something to do with maybe it not really catching on that well. But actually, I kind of like it. The other thing, too, about this game that was fairly groundbreaking at the time is that it felt very realistic. So, for instance, when you're sliding around corners, it feels right. I mean, you can really control the cars like that. So I don't know. It's just something about Motorhead that I just really liked, and I just want to show it really quickly on here because it's a total hidden gem. Oh man, I am so glad to include a Commodore 64 game in this list. This is Buggy Boy, and it's also called Speed Buggy, and I believe it's based on an arcade game. But as a kid, I had the Commodore 64 version, and I loved it to death. I think for me, there wasn't anything quite like it. It kind of looks maybe like Outrun, but it has enough variety in it that it just feels fresh and new. And as a matter of fact, it's still a lot of fun to play today. When I was capturing this footage here, I actually played it for several hours. Such a great game. Also, too, it helps that the levels are randomized, and so the objects that you see on the raceway they're different every time, and so it keeps it fresh. But one of the things that I really loved about it is that the environment is kind of interactive. So for instance, you'll see logs that are laying in front of you, and if you hit those, you can jump over stuff. And there's also little rocks that you'll see, and if you hit those just right, you'll go up on 2 wheels and you can squeeze through gates. Really fun game, and it looks and plays great. So if you haven't checked out Buggy Boy, either play the arcade version or get the Commodore 64 version, because it's a total classic. Now here's the game that is almost a definition of a classic and hidden gem that just not a lot of people played, which is really unfortunate, and that is Rollcage Stage II. This is by Midway, and it's on the PlayStation 1, and it's a really fun and interesting racing game. Now Rollcage stands out because it kind of at times feels almost like a kart racer, where you pick up weapons, or maybe like Wipeout, and you're doing battle, and you're kind of in this futuristic setting. But it has its own vibe, and one of the things I love about this is that you notice these cars have huge wheels, and that's because you can roll these cars around on top of the roof and still keep going. As a matter of fact, on some of these tracks, and there's a lot of tracks in this game, there's like 18 of them, you can actually do huge barrel rolls around the track and land on your roof and just keep right on going. So it's totally unique, and this is a lot of fun. I actually keep going back to this game whenever I'm kind of missing it and kind of want to play something new and different. Here's a fun little kart racing game I hadn't heard about until recently, and that's called Mickey's Speedway USA for the Nintendo 64. This is a fairly late release for the N64. It came out in the year 2000, but it came out from an awesome developer, Rare, which of course made a ton of great games, and you can really see that in this game. There's a ton of quality in this title. Now, if maybe this game looks kind of familiar, well, that's because they actually used a modified version of the Diddy Kong racing engine. But that also means that it's a pretty solid kart racer. And like a lot of those, you pick up weapons and you're cruising around a closed circuit and trying to take each other out. It's a pretty decent game. I would say that it's not perfect. I think the difficulty is too hard on some of the other settings and too easy on the others. So it's not a really well balanced game. But if you're really into Disney characters, it's got tons of them, and I actually think the graphics look pretty good. Here's a forgotten little gem that came out on the PC back in 1998, I believe, and it's called Powerslide. This game was pretty advanced for its time. The graphics engine alone pushed hundreds of thousands of polygons and just looked really beautiful, but it also had a really advanced AI for your computer opponents, and it had a really cool physics system. But more than that, actually, I think most people like this game because the track design actually allowed you to explore it a bit, so you weren't confined to narrow roads and things like that. You could actually kind of find your own way through a level, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. I love sliding around corners and just going balls to the wall. You feel like you're barely in control in this game, but yeah, Powerslide was a lot of fun. And now we get to one of my all-time favorite racing games, and it just so happens to be this hidden gem. Not a lot of people played it, and it's really unfortunate, and that is Splashdown Rides Gone Wild on the PlayStation 2.
Get out of my way!
Splashdown is a Sea-Doo racing game that I think a lot of people, when they first see it, compare it to maybe Wave Race on the N64, or maybe Hydro Thunder, but this game really stands on its own, primarily for two reasons. One, the controls are spot on, and the level design in this game is like no other. I mean, it's fantastic. Now, the game advertises that it takes its approach to the level design as though they're modeled after maybe theme parks, you know, that you would go to like at Disney World or something like that. But it gets even wackier than that. So, to give you an idea, for instance, in the very first level, you're cruising around in Bermuda, and it's a beautiful sunny day, and lots of birds in the air, and then all of a sudden there's this crackle of lightning, and then suddenly you're transported to the Bermuda Triangle, where ships and airplanes are falling out of the sky, you're barely missing you, there's all this stuff going on, and the path that you take changes on every lap. Other levels highlight creativity as well. There's a James Bond inspired level. There is an ice stage, of course, but it's unlike any other I've ever played. There's a haunted mansion that you ride through and it changes. There's also like a flooding city, almost like New Orleans, and the water's rising and therefore changing the landscape because houses are getting submerged. It's a totally crazy game. In addition to that, though, and unlike a lot of other racing games, in Splashdown, I feel like they got the trick system right. Splashdown is just, again, one of my all-time favorite games, and you can find it very cheap. So if you love racing games, I highly recommend you pick up a copy. As a matter of fact, I have two, just in case one of them would ever not work. So that's a quick look at some forgotten racing games, but before we go, I want to show you something out of my collection that not a lot of people have seen, and that's because they weren't for sale, and that is the official Gran Turismo 3 driving gloves. Now, Sony sent me these as a promo back when I was professionally reviewing games, and this is back when Gran Turismo 3 originally came out. This was in the box, and thought it was kind of cool. Thought I'd share it with fellow racing game fans. You don't see them very often. I've been very pleased and surprised at the response that I've gotten from people watching the part one of this forgotten game series. It's been really cool to get suggestions for racing games that even I didn't know about. So if you have more games that you'd like to see in part 3 and part 4, post below. There's a ton of great games out there that I think need to be highlighted. So I want to thank you for watching my channel, and as always, thank you for subscribing. Take care.